There's a lot of whiskey in the world, and to some people there might be a lot of whiskey on this table. So what is the difference between all of the whiskeys out there? What do you really need to know? But in this video, the goal is that you will understand that, and you're going to feel more confident in the conversation. Let's go. We got tea, we got whiskey, and today we're talking about the different types of whiskey that are out there. Welcome back to another episode of Whiskey and Wine, where we try to make the world of whiskey and wine more approachable for more people. My name's Sam, and like I said, we are talking about whiskey today. So let's just dive right in. Before we go too deep, we should really understand what is whiskey in general. And for anyone who's about to skip past this or go to the next video, just bear with me. This is going to be super short. Whiskey is simply just an alcohol that is distilled from cereal grains, and most of the time it is going to be aged in something. That's it. Okay, cool. Moving on. There are a ton of other rules that are going to come into play, but we're not going to worry about those right now. We'll get to them. The first thing that you might notice when you're looking at all these different types of whiskey is that some whiskeys have an E, and then some whiskeys don't have an E. If you may have noticed in our channel, we have whiskey, and there's either parentheses around the E or underscores around the E. That was technically on purpose. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't have to, but also it worked out because the E is optional. The only thing that this really signifies is where that specific region kind of picks up their heritage from. So if you have an E in the whiskey, you are basically saying that you kind of follow what Ireland is doing. So Ireland, when they were making whiskey, they want to differentiate themselves. There we go. From Scotland, who did not have the E. But it was this whole thing of who came up with it first. Was it Scotland? Was it Ireland? If you really look at the history, the whole idea of distilling things, and specifically distilling grains, this goes back way further. So it doesn't really matter. Just understand that Scotland does not have the E, and anyone who kind of follows that, which is the majority of the world in all honesty, does not use an E. But then everyone else, basically America and Ireland, they use the E. A really easy rule of thumb for this is if there is an E in the country's name, they probably have the E in whiskey. Just happens to work out, so that's kind of nice, but it really has nothing to do with anything except for where they kind of get their history from. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, let's move on to the different types of cereal grains that you are going to see when you are looking at whiskey. Now, there are going to be just a ton of options here. We're going to focus on the big four, and I'm also going to mention some other ones as well. So the big four are going to be corn, barley, wheat, and rye. Now, yes, there are other ones like rice, like oats, like millet. These are fantastic grains to use, just most people aren't using them and historically really have not used them. So we're going to focus on the big four. Let's start with corn. Only reason I'm starting with corn is because that's what most of you guys, because you're viewing this most likely in the US. If you're not, say hi down below. I want to know where all this is going. But mainly in the US, we know bourbon, which is 51% corn. Corn is going to give off this very sweet note. And yes, corn is a sweeter grain. It is honestly the sweetest grain out of all the grains that are used for making a spirit. So if someone says, oh, I really like that bourbon, you like a sweet spirit. Deal with it. It's fine. So do I. Now there are tons and tons of different types of corn. There's purple corn, yellow corn, red corn, and then there's going to be all of the other heirloom types of corns out there. Each one is going to give off different flavor notes. We're not going to get into all of that. Just understand that corn, mainly used for bourbon, and it is also going to be pretty sweet in general. The next big one, and honestly the biggest one, is going to be barley. Barley is really interesting, and for multiple different reasons. Barley is going to be used in almost every single whiskey. There's going to be a small percentage of malted barley. Malting is just a process that happens when you wet the grain so that it can start to germinate, because it's preparing to sprout and turn into an entire just plant. However, we don't want it to turn into a plant, so we dry it out really fast. That allows all of the yeast to be able to more easily eat the starch and the sugars and convert that into alcohol. So you'll see malted rye out there, because that is another way you can do this. However, rye is much harder to work with. Barley, and malted barley specifically, is going to be probably the most prevalent style of whiskey out there when you hear single malt. Single malt is going to be 100% malted barley made in one distillery, one growing season, all this stuff, but it's just single distillery, and it is 100% malted barley. That's the big thing that you need to know. This is going to give off a little bit of a grainy note, but usually not too much. Especially when you look at something that is 100% malted barley, you're not going to get all of these grainy, weird notes in there. It's going to be very well rounded because people have been doing it for so long and know how to make something taste good. For example, this is a single malt From Isla, I love this. It's Octomore, it's fantastic. Granted, this is also heavily peated, so there's some other things going on there. But we're not gonna worry about that right now. Let's jump back over to rye. So I mentioned rye is kind of hard to work with. So not a lot of places like doing something that is 100% rye. It's a little tricky. However, the flavor notes and the things you care about, rye is going to be much bolder. You're going to get these baking spice notes, and for some people you're also going to get a very rich and bold flavor like spearmint. There are a plethora of different types of flavors you're going to get from a rye depending on what type of rye you're using. Now, changing the type of rye you use versus the type of corn you use, especially here in the US, that is going to be much more up for discussion. So if you want to see something kind of cool, go look up basically a rye tasting chart, and you can see all of these different bottles that are all over the place, from savory to sweet to bold to spicy to all these other flavors. It is insane how many flavors you can get out of rye. Lastly, we'll talk about wheat. I don't actually have a wheat bottle up here because I can't find it. I don't know where the bottle went. But wheat whiskeys are going to be much more mellow. So wheat is a really fun grain. It is a softer grain, and it is going to effectively round out all of these sharp edges that you might get out of a bourbon or out of a rye, or just making whiskey in general. It's going to really round it out. It's going to be much more approachable. Sometimes you're going to get a little bit of a funk in there, so keep that in mind, beware of that. But in general, it is a very soft, round flavor. That's honestly the best way I can describe it. I personally don't really like wheat whiskeys, but I'm trying to get past my bias here. Let's talk regions. Different regions are going to have different rules and different things that are going to have to go into making this whiskey and actually being able to label it as such. Let's start with the big one, bourbon. Again, starting with bourbon because we're in the US. Bourbon can only be made in the US. Anywhere that is legally the US, we can make bourbon. Now, technically bourbon is just 51% corn, new charred oak cask, and distilled below certain proofs, barreled at a certain proof, all this stuff. So if someone followed that, but they were outside the US, they would still not be able to call it bourbon, but it would be a corn whiskey. You really don't see a lot of these outside the US because not that many people really like them and they prefer their single malts. Speaking of single malts can be made anywhere. And just recently in the US, we actually have American single malt now as a category. And again, this does have to be 100% malted barley, single distillery, all this stuff, yada, yada, yada. But that can be made anywhere. The next big one, rye. Rye can technically be made anywhere. However, due to a really fun thing that the EU and Canada decided to do, you can't label something rye if it comes from the EU right now. I'm hoping they fix this, but EU went into agreement with Canada. Canada's like, yeah, we can call all of this rye. You can't call it rye. Rye is a Canadian thing. Thankfully, the US did not do that, so we still have our rye whiskey. But yeah, effectively anywhere outside the EU, we can call it rye if it is rye. Otherwise, they just get to call it whiskey. Wheated whiskey, that's another one that can be made anywhere. And then we have our distinctions by actual country. So Scotch obviously has to be made in Scotland. It actually has to be barreled, bottled, all of that stuff in Scotland. There's more rules besides that. Ireland or Irish whiskey, same thing. Japanese whiskey, same thing. The last big thing that's going to change in all these whiskeys are going to be the aging rules. Bourbon technically does not have a minimum age requirement, which is kind of interesting. However, there are a lot of rules out there that make it beneficial for people to go up to 4 years. I should say 4 years minimum. But it's interesting because we're really the only ones who don't have that age minimum. In Scotland, it has to be aged in a oak cask or wooden cask no larger than 700 liters for at least 3 years. Ireland, same thing. Japan, technically not the same thing, but those are the rules that they follow because they kind of track with everything that Scotch is doing. And then guess what? Canada, same thing. The world of whiskey can seem really complex, but when it comes down to it, these are simply just distilled grains that were put into a barrel for some amount of time, and then you bottle it. It does not have to be that scary. If you're interested about jumping into whiskey, just go ahead and check it out. Try something. And if you have questions about it, feel free to drop it down on one of our videos. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you guys and make the world of whiskey and wine more approachable for more people. Because more people being here is more fun. Hey guys, if you made it to the end of the video, drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought of this. Let me know what your favorite style of whiskey is, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.